living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
Have you been trying to stop acting out in some way, especially when it comes to sex, sexuality, all of that side of life? I'm Dr. Carol, and you're listening to Relationship Prescriptions. Trying to stop behavior that is unwanted, unhealthy, not bringing you what you want. How's that been working out for you? Sadly, many people have been trying to do exactly that, and you are frustrated. You keep asking God to forgive you. It's not working. Intellectually, you believe that God has an answer, but you just keep trying harder, and it's not getting anywhere. My guest today, Jay Stringer, guides men and women to understand the why behind their unwanted sexual choices, so that they can pursue the life they've always wanted, the life God has for them. Jay Stringer's book, Unwanted: How Sexual Brokenness Reveals Our Way to Healing, helps get under the surface. In the recent COVID-19 pandemic, around the world, pornography use went way up, in part as a way to deal with the angst, with the social isolation, people going to porn to try and address the emptiness. But when you don't understand the why underneath, the shame just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and then you go to the behaviors to try and deal with the shame, and it's a vicious cycle. It's not working. Well, Jay Stringer is a licensed mental health counselor, ordained minister, and speaker around the country on the subject of unwanted sexual behavior. He studied thousands of men and women, looking at the factors in their history and in their life that explained so much of what was keeping them hooked in unwanted sexual behavior. We're going to talk about that whole process, what that's like, what it means to look under the surface of your sexual story to get to the why behind your sexual choices. I don't want to wait any longer. Here is my conversation with Jay Stringer. Well, Jay, what a pleasure and an honor to have you on our program. Thank you for joining us.
Dr. Carol, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on your show.
I first heard about you on Dan Allender's podcast. I've read your book and been following some of your work. One thing that I just want to start out with saying is how grateful I am to see somebody like you who's not afraid to get under the surface. I know much of your work has been with men and women who find themselves dealing with really self-destructive behaviors, especially around sex and sexuality, whether it's pornography or affairs, buying sex, those kinds of things that we tend to put high on the sin list for those who have been in the Christian world. But our normal or a classic response from many in the body of Christ has been, well, just shape up, pray harder, work harder. You got to take care of this. But that just doesn't work, does it?
No, it doesn't at all. Yeah, I mean, I would put so much of that into the category of what I refer to as lust management. And this is the, bounce your eyes when you're having a sexual thought, get some internet monitoring on your computer. And then if you continue to struggle, get into some form of accountability. But as one of my friends put it to me about a year ago, he said, Jay, when I've been having the same conversation with my accountability partner for 15 years, something isn't really working. And so when we look at why hasn't this worked, I think part of what we have to look at is just what we're learning about trauma these days is that trauma is not just this event that happened to us a long time ago, but it's the ongoing imprint of that traumatic event, that season of our life. It's the ongoing imprint of that event on us today. And so I think what happens a lot, especially in Christian communities, is that we call men and women to integrity, but the very reality of trauma and abuse and difficulties that we go through in childhood is that those things are actually disintegrating. They fragment our sense of self. And so some of the first things that people begin to lean on to kind of give them a sense of comfort, to give them a sense of escape, usually end up being something like porn or sex. And so the reality of when you're just trying to, try harder and white knuckle it, that will never work, because what really needs to be engaged is someone's past and when they began to lean on unwanted sexual behavior.
I had a conversation, not unlike one you just referenced. I had a conversation with a friend of mine just within the last few days. And she is a woman who has been in ministry in some capacity for several decades. She has a Master's of Divinity degree. She has been, in the church since she was a child. She is not married, has not been married before. And the reason she and I ended up having this conversation is she, again, ended up in a sexual liaison with a friend over several months and ended up getting some physical consequences of that. She ended up getting a sexually transmitted infection. And finally, that devastated her so deeply. And she was saying things to me like, I know better. How could I do this? What happened?
Yes. So, and I think when you kind of begin to, whether it's the friend that you were just referencing, so many of us, it's not just this random sexual behavior that we tend to be participating in. What my research found on I did some research on about 4,000 men and women to get a sense of what was actually driving random hookups, pornography, buying sex. And basically what the research showed was that our sexual brokenness is not random. And I think the goodness and the good news of that is that sexual brokenness can actually be a roadmap to healing and not a life sentence to sexual sin. And so one of my kind of core beliefs is that problems are simply how we grow. And so whether it's your friend or, clients that I work with, sometimes when we face sexual brokenness or sexual problems, we can either attack those things with a lot of shame and lust management, or we can allow something of our own brokenness to be a teacher to us and to study the path that got us to it. And I think that that's really so much of what the gospel is all about. It is the invitation to heal so much of the heartache that actually brings us to our sexual brokenness to begin with.
You're talking about sexual brokenness, Jay, and I believe that all of us have experienced that in some dimension. But why is this such a big deal? I hear from people every week from literally countries around the world, men and women. Because I'm a woman, perhaps I hear from more women than some people might, but I hear from both men and women who get caught in this kind of thing. Why is the whole sexual makeup of us such a big hook?
Yeah. Well, I think I would say three things to that. The first is just the availability and anonymity associated with the pornographic world. I think it was probably 2 years ago, one of the biggest porn sites in the world said that the world watched about 4.6 billion hours of pornography on one website alone.
Wow.
One website, 4.6 billion, that's equal to over 5,000 centuries. And so what we're dealing with is pornography is completely ubiquitous in our world. The average age of initial exposure now is somewhere in the range of 7 to 9, 7 for boys, around 9 for girls. And oftentimes that's getting younger year by year. And so again, if your first sexual template tends to be something pornographic, that's going to shape the trajectory of your entire life. And so it's one of those things that people have grown up with literally from the time that they're 6, 7 years old. And it's everywhere we look. So I think that would be the first thing. The second thing is that, again, sexual brokenness doesn't happen in isolation. A lot of kind of my research and other people's research, like Dr. Patrick Carnes, found that people who struggle with sexual brokenness disproportionately come from families that could be either characterized as very rigid or very disengaged. And so when you look at so much of especially a Christian household, there are a lot of rules, lots of regulations that you're supposed to follow. And yet you also have a sense that your mom, your dad is often not compliant to those rules, that they might have an anger issue. They actually might care more about the cleanliness of the house than your own emotional well-being. And so what ends up happening, particularly in rigid family systems, is that you look for an escape from the authoritarian nature of your home. And porn often becomes that first place that you actually begin to experience something of your own power, something of your own decision making. And then the other category that Dr. Patrick Carnes looked at was just that a very disengaged family. And so that's that sense of, what I often say is middle school is often a prototype of hell. And so when you came home from school, did your mom, did your dad actually see your face, engage something of your heartache? And if they didn't, part of what ends up happening in the byproduct of a disengaged family is that you learn that, emotional intimacy and comfort are not found within the family system, but outside of it. And so a lot of my clients who grow up in those disengaged family systems are searching the world, the internet, the streets for someone to lock eyes with, someone to actually find them. And so that, I would say, are the two primary appeals to pornography, is that pornography gives you a place to find escape from the difficulties of life, but it also gives you a place to find revenge against the people who have hurt you, harmed you, or overlooked you. So I think if we're going to really address sexual brokenness, we can't just use language like, boredom or self-medicating, or, looking for love in all the wrong places. Sexual brokenness will always give us a sense of escape from the difficulties of life, but also a realm to reestablish power in the midst of the difficulties that we face in life. So we have to look at, what was the family that we were born into, and how did we learn to navigate our life in the midst of that family system breakdown?
Wow, that's some pretty enlightening ways to think of those core areas where so many, perhaps most of us, have some degree of brokenness. Theologically, Jay, before we get into a little more practical stuff, one of the things that I have come to believe is that because of how close sex is related to our need for a relationship, and because God created us as relational beings, that tends to be such a, quotes, easy, end quotes, way for us to go in a dangerous direction. There's that need, true need, an absolute true God created need that we have for connection, for relationship. And more than even just the sexual release aspects of it or sexual hormonal drives, which are real, but there's something really deep about that need for connection that drives us in that direction.
Yes, so well said, Dr. Carroll. So part of what I write about in my book is that there's a Catholic theologian by the name of Ronald Rolheiser, and what he talks about with regard to sex is he uses the word, basically saying that sex comes from the Latin word secare, which means to sever or to amputate from the whole. And so if you look at basically in the Old English, if you cut down a branch of a tree, you've just sexed it. You've just separated it. So he says that sex then is the awareness of how disconnected we are from one another and the way that we go about reconnecting. And so I think in our fragmented world, in our kind of broken world, we know that something in us has been fragmented, disintegrated. So we do search for ways to begin to reconnect, to be able to have a very powerful drive for this place to be known. But I think, theologically, what we also have to kind of grapple with is kind of the reality of evil. And I don't mean to kind of say that there's a devil on my shoulder telling me to do these bad things, but I follow C.S. Lewis on this, where he says that we either think far too much about evil or we think far too little about it.
Right.
And
evil,
so
We cannot escape. When we look at the glory of sex that has been lost and perverted and contaminated, how can you not have to grapple with evil in this way? How many lives have been destroyed by this? And that has to be evil.
Totally. And so, I think evil is out to destroy something of the glory of God, but it knows that it can't. So then it goes after that which most reflects his glory, which is you and I, which is males and females. And so, just when you look at John 10:10, what does the thief come to do? To steal, to kill, to destroy. And that word destroy is really, the sense of marring, that you go into an art museum and you see a Picasso, a Van Gogh, and you run a razor blade through it. And so that sense of so many of the difficulties in our life, like, again, when you think back to middle school or just some of the heartache of your life, evil was out to kind of mark you, and you realize how disconnected, almost a sense of, there is no one that's actually going to be there for me in some of the heartache of my life. And then east of Eden, we begin looking for connection outside of God and community to begin to kind of soothe us, to be able to care for us. And yet what we find is almost everything that we begin to lean on it ends up compounding the original pain. And I think that's so much of what sexual brokenness offers is very similar to Jesus. Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I'm going to give you rest. Oh. But then the moment that you take that bait, you realize I'm actually in greater disconnection, greater shame, greater disintegration than I even started with to begin with. And so I think that's the heartache that so many people are in is I want sexual brokenness to provide me an escape, but every escape that I have freaking taken in life has led to more debris.
What a counterfeit. Oh, that just cuts. That is wow. How's your sex life? Yes, that's a bit personal, but it's important. Sex and sexuality can be complicated. But sex is about a lot more than just biological functions or relationship status. It's about matters of the heart and ultimately your sexpectations. So, how is your sex life? Go to drcarolministries.com/sexlife and take the short quiz. Your personalized results will give you a snapshot of where you are and 3 specific recommended next steps to help you move forward. That's drcarolministries.com/sexlife. Jay, I'd like to talk a bit about how we go forward. And for much of my audience who are Christians, a standard response is, well, you just need to pray more. Just go to church more consistently, be around other believers, pray harder, ask God to take this away from you. Why doesn't he do that is a question I often get. Why doesn't he remove this desire for me? Talk about why that isn't enough.
Yes. Yes, it is not enough. So, part of what I would say to that answer is consider the difference between these 2 types of prayers. One is, God, help me get rid of my sexual brokenness. Help me stop this. New Year's resolution, new me, new leaf. Versus the prayer that kind of says, God, I keep coming back to this particular porn search, this particular sexual brokenness over and over again. Please, God, help me to understand my sin. And so I think the reality for so many of us is that we have to realize that one night, 2 nights of deliberate, prayerful curiosity about our sexual sin will take us so much further than 1,000 nights of prayerful despair to ask God to rid us of that thorn in our flesh. And so I think so much of what I love about, especially the Old Testament, is really what we encounter is the kindness and curiosity of God. So, after Adam has just eaten of the fruit that he was commanded not to eat from, God doesn't say, pray these problems away. He says, where are you? What have you done? And to Hagar, who, I just love that passage in Genesis 16, but the angel of the Lord finds Hagar where she's about to die and basically says, where do you come from? And where are you going? And so I think that would be what I would want us to envision, something of God's presence in our lives when we pray, is that God kind of comes back to us and says, where do you think this sexual brokenness comes from? When you think about your own introduction to pornography, when you think about your own sexual abuse, when you think about some of the heartache of your life, can you begin to see how sexual brokenness fits into that picture? So I would say if prayer is not about curiosity, but it's just kind of, God, I don't want to deal with this problem anymore, take it away. I just don't think that that's going to be terribly effective. So I would say that, but also I think that so many Christians go to prayer because they feel some level of conviction for their sin, and they pray for that. But I think so much of what the gospel really offers is not just conviction of sin, but also a sense of comfort for the heartache that we're going through in life. And so if my prayers are just, God, I failed again, I'm so sorry, that can only take us so far. But if the prayer is, God, there's something very broken about who I am, and I don't understand it all, but I know that I need something of your comfort, something of your gentleness to begin to face my sin, to be able to face some of the wounds of my past. Will you please be here with me? I think God's delight is to come and dwell with us, to offer us that comfort.
And God never sweeps any of that under the rug. He just doesn't magically zap things away. You mentioned the story of Hagar. And isn't that where she says, El Roy, the God who sees me?
Yes.
And then in the New Testament, Jesus with the woman at the well, when he says, go call your husband, she says, I don't have one. And Jesus says, you've had 5 husbands. It wasn't a condemning thing. It was Jesus saying, I see you, the whole thing.
Yes. Yeah. And to me, that's the point, is when you look at, as you put so well, Dr. Carol, Old and New Testament, like it's when you look at what the incarnation of God is all about, it's God taking on the New Testament word, which is sarx, which is the flesh that can be diseased, that can be killable. And that's where God shows up. In the Old Testament, it's outside, it's basically it's in the wilderness. It's outside of the realm of power. And so when we look at what God is doing, God shows up in the midst of our brokenness, that our sexual dysfunctions and problems are the very geography. It's the very terrain where we are to look for something of the kindness of God. And so rather than kind of seeing this thing is a thorn in our flesh, I think far more, this is a type of crucible that we have to undergo in order to understand the wounds of our past and how to grow into the type of person that's able to move through some of the difficulties of our present without outsourcing them to pornography, an affair, or some other type of sexual behavior.
So that means getting under the surface of your story. It means asking, where are you? Where did you come from? And where are you going?
Yes.
It means seeing yourself along with Jesus being right there. He sees you. Now you have to see you, looking at your story.
Yes, very much so.
You talk in your book, Unwanted, about some of the relationship needs we have, some of the characteristics of relationships to cultivate as we go through this journey of healing and growth. That was some of the most encouraging and actionable aspects that I found in your book, Unwanted. And I just wonder if you can unpack a couple of those relationship characteristics that we need to cultivate in this journey.
Sure. Yeah, I think, to start, I think one of the relationship skills that we need to cultivate is, in psychology, we refer to kind of good parenting as a sense of rupture and repair, that every parent is going to create ruptures in the relationship with their kids. But what good parents do, good relationships do, is that they actually address those ruptures. And seek to repair them. And so I think, a lot of times a classic counseling situation that I've run into, Dr. Carol, is there might be a man who makes a bid for intimacy with his wife. and she rebuffs him, she might get a sense that the meaning of the sex that they're about to have is basically a hostage situation of, I need to have sex with my husband or he's going to get really upset with me. And again, I hope what listeners can hear is the bind that that wife is in. And so if she says no, there's going to be a type of anger. If she says yes, she compromises something of her own dignity. And so that, a lot of times what ends up happening is a husband says, makes a bid, the wife says no, and then an argument erupts. And then an hour later, he's in the bathroom, or the next day, he's kind of looking at porn on his computer or phone. And so what ends up happening is that people, especially men that I work with, will kind of just say, well, I felt rejected. I felt, abandoned. But when you actually press him on that, there's so much anger and rage beneath the surface of that. And so he's created a lot of rupture, and then he tries to kind of repair just through maybe saying, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have gotten upset. But he actually hasn't addressed so much of his anger beneath the surface. So what a good relationship does is to be able to, for the wife to kind of be able to say, we had a rupture last night, and the easiest way to repair seems like it's just to have good sex so that we can kind of put all that behind us. But that's a counterfeit form of repair. And so I think the deeper work that we need to do is to be able to say, I want to repair with you, but I think we also need to be honest that there are times where I don't feel free to say no to you, because I know that as a man, you don't know how to regulate your emotions without going to anger and to rage. And so I think every good relationship has to be able to have integrity with, I create rupture, and some of the ways that I go about repairing are not effective. And so in my book, that's what I'm really trying to say is that problems are opportunities to grow relationally. And I think so many of us get married or get into relationships, and we have the emotional maturity of a middle schooler. And that's not going to go terribly well, but that doesn't mean your marriage is broken. What it means is that the marriage is doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is to reveal the heartache, the difficulties, the impasses that both man and woman don't know how to get through. So that would be rupture and repair.
You have just talked through, friends, listeners, if you heard that last 2 minutes, great. If you didn't, pause and rewind what Jay was just saying. Jay, I've got to tell you, you have just addressed the number one question that I get asked in my online ministry. The single numerically most frequent is both husbands and wives. My wife doesn't want to have sex with me. My husband doesn't want to have sex with me. What do I do? The shame, the rejection, the anger, the isolation, the frustration, the searching for something else. And you have just highlighted what that can make possible if you look under the surface.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And I think that's that. I mean, what I would say is so much of the path there, path to healing there is, I mean, especially for men, this is taken from Dr. Siegel's work. But he has something called a window of tolerance. So he kind of uses a green zone to kind of say that you're in your window of tolerance. Then there's a red zone, which is kind of when you're in an agitated or hyper aroused state where you get upset. Maybe you're angry at your wife, you're angry at traffic. And then there's something called a blue zone, which is when you go hyperarousal or depressed or kind of go offline. And so a lot of times what happens, especially with men, is that, their window of tolerance, their ability to feel emotionally stable is okay if they have a solid income, their spouse wants to have sex with them 1.3 times a week. Things are going relatively well, but the moment that they might not get exactly what they want, they go into the red zone. They get agitated, they get angry, then they might watch porn, then they might kind of create a big rupture with their children or at work, and then they go back into the blue zone, which is they feel depressed. They feel sorrowful. And so that sense of what Dan Siegel says is emotional maturity is to be able to increase your window of tolerance. And a lot of times that has to be an orientation for a man to actually care for his own emotions and learn how to self-soothe and confront himself rather than just outsourcing it to his spouse or to porn. So a lot of times when I see Christian marriage, especially Christian marriage authors talk about marriage, part of my pushback is that they are actually pushing for a type of emotional fusion rather than inviting people to differentiate and to care and soothe themselves before they ask their spouse to kind of take away something of their agony or difficulty or anger. So I think all problems that we face maritally, sexually, are really cornering us with a sense of who do we want to become in the face of this difficulty? And it's just so much easier to ask our spouse to change or to find porn or an affair so that I don't have to deal with who I am.
Powerful. I like the concept learning to feed yourself. It's something I talk to people about in different kinds of circumstances. You can't expect God to douse you with all the nutrients you need. Neither can you expect your spouse or any other one person to do that. Just like when you grow up beyond babyhood, you know when you're hungry, you learn what's nourishing, you learn you have a choice, and you have to take it into your being.
Totally. Yes. And I love just that image, Dr. Carol. I feel like that's so many of us as adults, we just like are whining to be doused with care and empathy. And we ask our spouse to do things that we are not even willing to do ourselves. And part of the question then is, how can your spouse's desire for you grow if you don't take care of yourself? That's not the most attractive thing. So.
Exactly. Jay, for somebody who's been listening to this and, maybe the light has come on and they're starting to see that what they are struggling with right now, it came from somewhere. They didn't just wake up yesterday and say, I'm going to destroy my life by having an affair or looking at porn. It came from somewhere and they're kind of overwhelmed. How do I deal with this? Talk for a minute for somebody who's feeling discouraged or overwhelmed and kind of at the beginning, some places to step forward in this journey.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I write about in Unwanted is that all of us are going to have to face our shame. And what comes naturally to us when we first begin to recognize that there's a problem is that we try and run away from our shame. But in running from shame, it actually legitimizes its messages about us. And so one of the best things that we can do is to actually turn and face our shame, and then to begin to tell our community, a good friend, an ally, even an accountability partner about what we are dealing with. So I think individually we have to begin to face our shame and not live as prey to that shame. But I think secondly, and this is a lot of what my ministry was dealing with, is that most of what's out there in terms of recovery, in terms of reading and resources are all about trying to manage lust and anger, and that it just is not effective. And so part of what I designed both in the book Unwanted, but I also created a self-assessment precisely for that person. So it's about 160 question self-assessment that people can take that provides them with compass headings as to what stories are actually contributing to their sexual brokenness. So there's a lot online that, you take a sexual addiction screening test or a brokenness screening test. And the problem with those is that all it does is tell you, yeah, you might have a problem or your problem is mild, but it doesn't really give you a sense of what's actually driving it and what themes to identify and transform. And so this unwanted sexual behavior self-assessment actually provides people with those compass headings about what is beneath the surface of their behavior. So I would say take that assessment. And then also part of what my team has been doing is we created an online course for small groups and for allies, accountability partners, friends to go through. That's actually an 18-week deep dive into your own story and how that's shaping your sexual brokenness. And people who are going through the course that have been through it are absolutely loving it, because they're getting a sense of this. This isn't just about, freedom from sexual brokenness, but really that the point of the gospel is it is for freedom that you have been set free.
Yes.
And so when people begin to get a sense of, this sexual brokenness is actually a clarion call for me to heal some of the heartaches of my life so that I can actually feel more free in my marriage, in my ministry, in my relationship with my kids. And so, if there are people that are willing to take those first initial steps, I would say there are great resources to help you understand your life and your story. But you've got to get down. Most people fly over their life story at 30,000 feet. And these resources are going to kind of say, let's go a little bit closer to the surface of what's really happening in your life.
Well, the course you had mentioned, I've looked into that, heartofmanjourney.com, I believe, right, Jay?
Yes. Yeah.
Powerful stuff. Worksheets, videos, links to other resources. And I want to certainly encourage our listeners to check into that. The assessment that you mentioned, is there a place they can find that? Where would they find that?
Sure. That's at my website, jay-stringer.com. And then there's a little tab that says self-assessment.
We will link to those resources in our show notes, and also to your social media, Jay, and to your book, Unwanted, How Sexual Brokenness Reveals Our Way to Healing. Jay, thank you for your work. Thank you for your journey in helping uncover the issues that we need to deal with, and also a pathway to healing in line with the gospel. The gospel is nothing if it isn't enough to deal with our biggest problems, and this is one of those big problems.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Carol. For your willingness to host this conversation. And as you said so well, this is one of the number one issues that so many people are facing. And let's face our problems with meaning, with curiosity, because when we do so, the path of healing is going to be revealed. I think so often we try and stop our behaviors rather than really be curious about what they might be revealing for our good.
Bless you and your work and those you minister to. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
If you have been carrying shame, struggling to quit doing something you know was not healthy, that was unwanted, especially around the area of sex, I know that this idea, this concept of getting under the surface and dealing with the why behind your sexual choices will make all the difference in the world. Jay Stringer's book, Unwanted, How Sexual Brokenness Reveals Our Way to Healing. Check the show notes. We'll have a link to that in the show notes, and I've read it. It's powerful. I also want to let you know about our Sexpectations Resource that will help you get under the surface of your sexual story. YourSexpectations.com. We have just released this online digital course, and I am so excited. Friends, I literally hear from people every day, men and women, young and old, married and single, from around the world. I hear from them every day who are struggling with this. Whether it's broken intimacy in marriage, whether it's single and going from relationship to relationship, whether it's struggling with the after effects of sexual trauma and therefore unable to really experience intimacy, or hooked on porn, like we especially focused on in our conversation with Jay Stringer today, and a whole slew of other variations thereof. Friends, if you are struggling with something in this area, you are not alone. God created you with the need, the desire, and the capacity for intimacy. And that need is God-given. And as Jay and I talked about in this conversation, when you start going in a dark direction there and going to get those needs filled up, often because of what happened to you, the shame, the blanket of shame is heavy. Dealing with your sexual story is the way to get under the surface, disinfect that blanket of shame, and walk forward with new hope. Sexpectations.com. This online course will help you do exactly that. It will help you look at your sexual story with honesty and compassion. That's how Jesus looks at your sexual story. Honesty and compassion. This course will help you take steps to experience the restoration that Jesus has for you and to write the next chapter of your story with hope. I know this will make a difference for you. Freedom and joy and a lifestyle of transformation can be yours. You do not have to stay stuck. Sexpectations.com. Go there today as part of this course. If you get this course now, I am spending 7 weeks with group Zoom calls that you can be a part of if you join this course now, where we together can address these issues in a live setting, as well as the videos and the worksheets and the prayer challenge emails, so much. Come check it out, Sexpectations.com. I'm inviting you to come and join me there. I want to thank you for being part of our podcast family. Feel free to send me a comment or a question anytime. I love hearing from you. Just the Contact Us page on drcarolministries.com. And until next time, may God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol. Our purpose is to provide trustworthy resources that help you and others live fully alive in every way as God intended. If you would like to help others experience transformation in their lives and relationships, we invite you to partner with us. Text the word GIVE, that's GIVE, to the number 512-980-1620. Or visit our website at drcarolministries.com/donate to make a one-time contribution or monthly gift. Your financial support allows us to expand our message and to help others. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.